On Easter Sunday, right after the 11 a.m. church service, my father slid a notarized eviction notice across the dining table and told me I had 30 days to disappear from his house. The ink was still wet when my mother calmly changed the garage code to lock me out. If you're watching this from somewhere far away, tell me where in the comments. And if you've ever had family look you in the eye and pretend you're disposable, hit like and subscribe. Some of us learn the hard way that blood doesn't mean loyalty. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even touch the paper at first. The house was a 1920s brick Victorian in Naperville, Illinois. 5 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, stained glass windows in the stairwell. Estimated value? $1.2 million in the current market. And every square inch of it was legally mine. But you wouldn't have known that from the way my parents were sitting there. Shoulders squared, faces rehearsed, as if they'd practiced this scene in front of a mirror. My older sister, Melanie Crawford, sat beside her husband, Daniel Crawford, one manicured hand resting on her 6-month-old baby bump. She wore soft blue, innocent, delicate, strategic. Daniel leaned back in his chair like he was already hosting poker night in my living room. "Clara," my father said, tapping the eviction notice with 2 fingers. "You're 33. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. I am a senior public health compliance officer for Cook County. I audit hospital systems for federal violations. Before that, I earned my CPA license. I manage risk for a living. Standing on my own 2 feet has never been the problem." But I let him continue. "Melanie and Daniel need the space," my mother added, folding her napkin neatly. "They're expanding the family." Daniel smiled faintly. "And I'm launching a pediatric wellness startup. We need a home office and a nursery. This house makes sense for us." This house. I finally picked up the document. It was a formal notice to vacate. 30 days. Signed by my father, Richard Bennett. Notarized the previous Friday. He must have felt proud of himself walking into that UPS store. "You're serious?" I asked quietly. "Very," he replied. Here's the part they didn't understand. 5 years ago, when my grandmother died, she did not leave that Victorian to my parents. She left it to me. Outright. Fee simple absolute. No trust, no co-ownership. The deed was recorded with DuPage County. Book 4892, page 117. My father had insisted we keep it quiet to avoid family tension. He said it would embarrass him socially if people knew his daughter owned the house. So I let him pretend. I paid the $14,600 annual property taxes. I paid the $3,200 homeowner's insurance. I paid for the $48,000 roof replacement after the hailstorm. Every month, he transferred me $1,000 labeled contribution, which conveniently covered nothing close to market rent. But publicly, I was the unmarried daughter living at home. Melanie, of course, was the golden child. At 35, she had never held a full-time job longer than 8 months. She described herself as a maternal wellness advocate. Translation: she posted filtered pregnancy quotes online. Daniel was worse. A serial entrepreneur. Translation: failed CrossFit gym, failed meal prep business, failed real estate flip in Aurora that ended in foreclosure. Now he wanted my house as collateral for his startup. I looked at the eviction notice again. "Who drafted this?" I asked. Daniel answered. "Our attorney." Our. That word hung in the air. My mother leaned forward. "We're doing what's best for the growing family. You'll find a condo downtown. You make good money." I watched them carefully. No one mentioned the deed. No one acknowledged ownership. That told me something important. They were betting on silence. Daniel cleared his throat. "To make this clean, we're planning renovations in May, so 30 days is generous." Renovations. I almost smiled. "Renovations funded how?" I asked. Melanie's jaw tightened. "We're restructuring some equity." There it was. Equity. I felt the first real flicker of heat in my chest. "Through a HELOC?" I asked calmly. Daniel stiffened. "It's none of your concern." Oh, but it was. Because 2 weeks earlier, I received a fraud alert from a regional bank, First Prairie Lending. requesting verification of a home equity line application tied to my property address. I had declined the verification. Someone had attempted to open a $250,000 HELOC against the house. The application listed Richard Bennett as sole property owner. It included a scanned copy of a warranty deed with my forged signature. I hadn't confronted them yet. I wanted to see how far they would go. Now I knew. Just so we're clear, my father said, voice hardening. We're not asking. We're telling. Melanie placed her hand protectively over her stomach. Family helps family, she said softly. I met her eyes. Does it? I asked. Silence. You ever notice how people invoke family right before they take something from you? I folded the eviction notice once. Twice. Precisely. I'll consider your request, I said. Daniel laughed. It's not a request. I stood up slowly. Melanie, I said, when's the baby shower? She blinked, confused. 3 weeks. At the Naperville Country Club. Public venue. Over 80 guests invited, including extended family, church friends, Daniel's investors. I nodded. That sounds lovely. My father frowned. Why are you asking? No reason. I walked upstairs to my room, the smallest one in the house I legally owned, and closed the door. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Elaine Porter, real estate litigator, aggressive, meticulous. When she answered, I said 4 words. They finally made their move. She didn't ask what I meant. I'll file the list pendants tomorrow, she replied. And Clara? The title company confirmed something interesting. My hand tightened around the phone. What? There was a second filing attempt yesterday afternoon. My stomach went still. A second attempt? Yes, she said. And this one included a lender pre-approval letter. They're moving faster than we thought. Downstairs, I could hear Melanie laughing, Daniel pouring wine, my parents talking about paint colors for their nursery. They thought I was cornered. They thought I would pack quietly. They thought I didn't know. They forgot one thing. I audit institutions for a living. Fraud leaves fingerprints, and I had just found the first one. But what they don't know yet is that I signed something too, yesterday. And when it's recorded, everything changes. Tell me, if your own parents tried to leverage your home behind your back, would you walk away quietly? Or would you wait for the perfect moment? 3 days before Easter, at exactly 4:17 p.m., I signed a document that made my father's eviction notice legally meaningless. And I did it without telling a single person in that house. If you've ever had to move in silence while everyone underestimated you, type silent strength in the comments. Some battles aren't loud, they're strategic. The document wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no courtroom, no confrontation. It was a warranty deed transfer into a newly established irrevocable living trust, the Clara Bennett Asset Protection Trust. Sole trustee, me. Sole beneficiary, me. Successor trustee, Elaine Porter. Recorded with DuPage County at 8:52 a.m. the next morning. Which meant that by the time my father slid that eviction notice across the Easter table, he wasn't even pretending to evict me from property I owned directly. He was attempting to evict a trustee from trust property he had zero legal authority over. And that detail matters. Because when someone tries to take something from you, the first thing you do is remove emotion. The second thing you do is remove access. The third thing you do is create consequences. I didn't confront them immediately after calling Elaine. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into the DuPage County Public Records portal. There it was. 2 filing attempts under my property's parcel number. The first, HELOC pre-application inquiry. The second, a suspicious corrective deed submission draft. Corrective deed. That's a term people use when they want to quietly fix a mistake on title. But in this case, there was no mistake, only intent. The draft listed Richard Bennett as sole fee simple owner due to clerical oversight in the original inheritance filing. Clerical oversight. They were trying to rewrite history. The document included my forged digital signature again. Only this time, the notary block listed a name I recognized. Thomas Keller. He was Daniel's golf buddy, and conveniently, a commissioned Illinois notary. My stomach didn't twist. It didn't need to. Fraud doesn't scare me. It interests me. Because fraud always escalates. I called Elaine back. Thomas Keller, I said. Check his notary commission status. She went quiet for a moment. Then I heard typing. Well, she said slowly, this just got more interesting. What? His commission expired 8 months ago. There it was. Forgery, improper notarization, attempted title manipulation, and possibly bank fraud. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were trying to take the house permanently. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my bedroom. White walls, minimal furniture. 5 years of pretending I was the dependent daughter. And suddenly, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because once someone crosses into criminal territory, the rules change. You don't argue with criminals. You document them. That night at dinner, I tested something. Dad, I said casually, have you spoken to any lenders recently? He didn't look up from his steak. Why would I? Just curious. I received a verification request tied to the property address. Daniel's fork froze midair. Melanie's eyes flicked toward him for half a second. It was subtle, but I saw it. Oh, my mother said, too quickly. That must be junk mail. Probably, I replied. Then I changed the subject. You ever watch people lie in real time? It's fascinating. Their shoulders tighten, their breathing shifts, their words become slightly more formal. They over-explain things you didn't even question. Daniel did all of it. The next morning, I did something they never expected. I filed a police report, not for eviction, not for emotional abuse, for suspected title fraud and forgery. I included copies of the HELOC inquiry, the corrective deed draft, Thomas Keller's expired notary commission. I didn't accuse my family directly. I simply reported the facts. Paperwork doesn't scream, it builds. Then I did one more thing. I placed a title lock and fraud alert on the property. Any future filing would trigger automatic legal review. And here's the part that matters. I didn't tell them. Because when someone believes they still have control, they make mistakes, big ones. By Thursday evening, Melanie posted on Instagram a pastel nursery mood board. Caption, new beginnings, expansion, growth. The comments were full of hearts. Daniel commented, building legacy. Legacy. I almost laughed. Friday afternoon, I received a call from First Prairie Lending. Ms. Bennett, the compliance officer said carefully, we need to clarify something regarding a $250,000 home equity application. Yes, I said, calmly. The applicant insists he is sole owner. Our title search shows otherwise. And what does your underwriting department think? I asked. There was a pause. We believe this may constitute attempted mortgage fraud. There it was. Layer 2. Evidence. Not just family betrayal. Financial crime. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. Please freeze the application and forward your findings to my attorney, I said. We already have. Good. That night, I overheard Daniel arguing in the kitchen. You said it would process automatically. It should have, my father snapped. Did you use the updated deed? Daniel asked. Silence. Then my mother's voice, strained. Lower your voice. I stayed upstairs, listening, collecting. Because here's the truth. Revenge doesn't need volume. It needs timing. Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after Easter, I received a certified letter notification filed by First Prairie Lending. They were officially reporting suspected mortgage fraud to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, which meant Thomas Keller was about to lose more than a golf buddy. By dinner, tension in the house was thick enough to cut. My father avoided eye contact. Melanie stopped posting online. Daniel was on his phone constantly, waiting. And then it happened. At 7:32 p.m., the doorbell rang. 2 men in business attire stood on the porch. Is Richard Bennett home? I watched from the staircase as my father opened the door. Yes, we're with the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. Daniel's face went pale. My mother grabbed the counter for support. They weren't here for me. They were here for signatures. And that was just the beginning. Because what none of them realized is that the baby shower at the Naperville Country Club, I've already secured the microphone, and I've invited someone very special to attend. 2 Sundays before the baby shower, at 9:08 a.m., my father signed a sworn statement denying any involvement in mortgage fraud. By 9:12 a.m., the investigator slid a photocopy of his text messages across the table. If you've ever watched someone lie with confidence and then crumble when confronted with receipts, you know exactly what that silence feels like. It's heavy. It's final. And it changes everything. The two men from the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation did not raise their voices. They did not threaten. They simply placed documents on the dining room table, the same table where my father had tried to evict me 1 week earlier. "Mr. Bennett," one of them said calmly, "are you aware that submitting a forged deed to secure a line of credit constitutes felony mortgage fraud under Illinois Statute 720 ILCS 5/17-10.6? My father cleared his throat. "I never submitted anything forged." Daniel stood behind him, arms crossed, jaw tight. The investigator flipped a page. "This is a certified copy of the corrective deed draft. It contains your digital authorization email sent from your personal account at 2:14 p.m. last Wednesday." Silence. My mother's hand trembled against the countertop. "I don't understand," she whispered. The second investigator turned slightly toward Daniel. "Mr. Crawford, you're listed as co-applicant on the HELOC request. Would you like to explain your role?" Daniel's voice was steady. "It was a misunderstanding. We believed Mr. Bennett had ownership rights." "Belief," the investigator replied evenly, "does not override recorded title." I stayed on the staircase, watching, not intervening. Because here's the thing about fraud investigations. They don't need emotion. They need documentation. And there was plenty of it. My father tried to shift the blame. This house was supposed to come to me. There was confusion when my mother passed. "Confusion," the investigator said, "does not generate forged signatures and expired notary stamps." Daniel finally snapped. "It was a financing strategy," he said sharply. "No funds were dispersed." "That is only because underwriting flagged inconsistencies," the investigator replied. "Intent still matters." Intent. That word echoed in the room. Layer 1 was betrayal. Layer 2 was evidence. We were now stepping into Layer 3. Consequences. The investigators left after 42 minutes. No arrests. Not yet, but they issued a formal notice. All parties involved were to refrain from further financial filings related to the property pending review, which meant their renovation plans were officially dead. The moment the door closed, the house erupted. "You said this would work!" my father shouted at Daniel. "It would have if she hadn't interfered," Daniel shot back. Melanie began crying immediately. "She reported us," she sobbed. "She wants to destroy this family." I finally walked down the staircase, calmly, measured. "No," I said quietly. "You tried to destroy me." Every head turned. My father's face flushed red. "You called the state?" he demanded. "I reported suspicious activity on my property," I replied. Daniel laughed bitterly. "Your property. You love saying that." "It's accurate," I said. Melanie wiped her eyes. "You're doing this over a baby?" That question almost made me smile. "It's not about the baby," I said. "It's about criminal exposure." My father slammed his palm against the table. "We're your parents!" "And that changes the statute?" I asked calmly. Silence again. "Here's something I've learned, auditing hospitals and county systems. The people who shout about loyalty the loudest are usually the ones hiding liability." That night, I called Elaine again. "They're officially under review," I told her. "I expected as much," she replied. "But Clara, there's something else." My chest tightened slightly. "What?" "Thomas Keller filed an affidavit this morning." "About what?" "He claims he notarized the corrective deed in person. States you were present." I felt it then. Not panic. Precision. "He's lying," I said. "Yes," she replied. And that's perjury. Layer 3 had just accelerated. Because when someone lies to investigators, they're not just protecting themselves. They're compounding the crime. "Do we have surveillance?" I asked. Elaine didn't hesitate. "You told me to install cameras in the foyer 6 months ago." I exhaled slowly. Yes, I did. And those cameras had time-stamped footage from the exact date Thomas Keller claimed I was physically present for notarization. I was at a county compliance conference in Springfield that day. I had hotel receipts, badge scans, panel recordings, and now video evidence from my own home showing he never stepped foot inside. Fraud is one thing. Perjury is another. The next morning, Elaine forwarded the footage to the investigators. By afternoon, Thomas Keller's notary commission was suspended pending review. By evening, Daniel stopped answering his phone. Melanie's Instagram account went private, and my mother knocked on my bedroom door for the first time in years. "Clara, she said softly, voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I opened the door, but didn't invite her inside. "Yes?" "You don't have to take this so far," she whispered. "We can fix this quietly." Quietly. That word again. Like they thought silence was still negotiable. "It stopped being quiet when you forged my signature," I said evenly. She flinched. "You're humiliating us," she said. I looked at her carefully. "No," I replied. "You humiliated yourselves." She began to cry. Real tears this time. But tears don't reverse filings. They don't erase emails. They don't undo notarized lies. "You're tearing this family apart," she said. I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm documenting it. There's a difference." 2 days later, I received confirmation that the department had referred the case to the county prosecutor's office for further review. Not an indictment yet, but the word prosecutor changes the temperature in a room. And here's where timing becomes everything. Because in 10 days, 87 guests will gather at the Naperville Country Club ballroom. Pink roses, champagne, custom cake. Daniel plans to announce his wellness startup launch. Melanie plans to unveil the nursery fund registry. My parents plan to smile like nothing ever happened. And I have secured the microphone, but I won't be speaking alone. The county prosecutor won't be there. That would be too easy. Instead, I invited someone who has already confirmed attendance. Someone Daniel desperately does not want in the same room with potential investors. Someone who knows exactly where $47,000 from his last failed business actually went. And when she walks in, the narrative changes again. Would you stay silent at that baby shower? Or would you let the truth sit at the head table? 10 days before the baby shower, at exactly 2:36 p.m., I received a wire transfer confirmation for $47,218.63. The sender's name made me smile. If you've ever watched someone who thought they buried their past suddenly realize it's been tracking them quietly the entire time, you understand the power of timing. The sender was Olivia Martinez, Daniel's former business partner, the one he publicly claimed mismanaged funds during his failed pediatric fitness studio launch 2 years ago, the one who quietly disappeared from their social circle after investors lost nearly $120,000, the one who, according to Daniel, couldn't handle entrepreneurship. Here's what actually happened. Olivia Martinez invested $47,000 of her own savings into Daniel's startup. She handled operations. He handled finances. 3 months later, the business account was drained. Daniel blamed unexpected lease termination penalties. Olivia suspected something else. She never proved it until she called me. It was last Tuesday, 8:14 p.m. "I heard what happened with the HELOC," she said without preamble. "He tried it again, didn't he?" "Yes," I replied. A pause. "He's escalating." "I know." Then she said something interesting. "I kept copies." "Of what?" I asked. "Wire transfers, Venmo pulls, personal credit card statements he used for vendor payments." I leaned back in my chair. "How much?" $47,218.63, she said precisely. That's what he redirected. There it was. Not bad accounting. Not business failure. Theft. She'd been sitting on proof for 2 years. "What do you want?" I asked her calmly. "Closure," she said. "And repayment." That's when I made the offer. "If I recover the funds publicly," I told her, "will you attend the baby shower?" Silence. Then a soft laugh. "You're serious?" "Very." She agreed. Now here's where strategy matters. I didn't want Daniel arrested before the baby shower. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him rehearsing speeches. I wanted investors present. Because humiliation without witnesses is just an argument. Humiliation with witnesses is consequence. 3 days after our call, Olivia emailed me the documentation, detailed transaction history, vendor invoices that didn't exist, payments to a private crypto exchange account registered under Daniel's name, timestamped, categorized, traceable. I forwarded everything to Elaine. Within 48 hours, she drafted a formal civil demand letter, but we didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, Olivia wired the exact stolen amount into a neutral escrow account managed by Elaine's firm. Why? Because when someone is exposed publicly, you don't just accuse, you demonstrate control. I had the funds secured and a release agreement prepared. All Daniel had to do was sign it publicly. Now let's talk about Melanie. Melanie had always been fragile in the way only golden children can be, protected, shielded, unchallenged. She truly believed Daniel was misunderstood, that the world was unfair to visionaries. She also believed the baby shower would reset everything, reclaim the narrative. Her guest list included 14 extended family members, 9 church leaders, 6 of Daniel's potential investors, the Naperville Country Club Social Committee chair, and 3 of my mother's longtime friends who measure worth by square footage. The theme was, Legacy Begins. I couldn't have written better irony. The night before the shower, my father knocked on my door again. "Clara," he said stiffly, "we expect you to behave tomorrow." I opened the door slowly. "Define behave." "Do not cause a scene," he replied. "We've been through enough." Have you noticed how the people who create chaos always ask you to protect their image? "I don't plan to cause anything," I said evenly. "That's reassuring," he muttered. "It depends entirely on Daniel," I added. His jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied calmly, "truth doesn't cause scenes. Lies do." He didn't sleep that night. I heard him pacing. The morning of the baby shower arrived bright and deceptively peaceful. Country club ballroom. Soft string quartet. Tables draped in blush linen. Gold-accented name cards. A massive 3-tier cake reading Baby Crawford. Melanie glowed. Daniel looked confident. Too confident. When he saw me enter, he gave a tight smile. "Glad you could make it," he said quietly. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. I took my seat near the front. Olivia arrived 20 minutes later. Black dress. Composed. Unapologetic. Daniel saw her immediately, his face drained. He approached her first. "You have nerve showing up," he hissed. She smiled faintly. "You invited investors. I figured transparency mattered." He walked away quickly. Melanie noticed the tension. "Clara," she whispered, "why is Olivia here?" "Because she supports maternal wellness," I said lightly. The program began. Games, laughter, gift opening. Then came Daniel's speech. He stepped to the microphone. "My family has faced challenges recently," he began. "But legacy is about resilience." I almost admired the performance. He talked about vision, community, future expansion. Then he announced, "I'm proud to share that our new pediatric wellness platform launches next quarter. We're finalizing investor rounds as we speak." That was my cue. I stood slowly, smoothed my navy dress, and walked toward the microphone. Melanie's smile faltered. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Clara," my mother whispered urgently. I reached Daniel's side and gently extended my hand. "For just a moment," I said sweetly. He hesitated. Then, under 87 watching eyes, he handed me the microphone, and I smiled. "Before Daniel finalizes his investor round," I said calmly, voice steady through the speakers, "there's a small financial clarification we should address." The room shifted, subtle at first. I looked directly at Daniel. "Daniel, would you prefer to return $47,218.63 privately, or should Olivia and I walk everyone through the transaction history?" You could hear the air leave the room. Melanie froze. My father stood halfway out of his chair. Olivia rose slowly from her table. Daniel didn't speak. He couldn't. Because I wasn't bluffing. I had the wire confirmation. I had the crypto exchange records. I had escrow secured. And most importantly, I had witnesses. "Daniel," I repeated softly, "investors value transparency." He swallowed. And for the first time since Easter, he looked small. "Would you have stopped there, or would you make him answer?" At exactly 2:14 p.m., in a ballroom filled with 87 guests and 3 potential investors holding champagne flutes, Daniel Crawford tried to laugh it off. It came out thin, brittle. If you've ever seen a man realize the room no longer belongs to him, you recognize that sound immediately. "Clara," he said into the microphone I was still holding, "this isn't appropriate." I tilted my head slightly. "Which part?" I asked calmly. "The repayment or the documentation?" A ripple moved through the crowd. Olivia stood 2 tables back, silent, composed, waiting. Melanie looked like someone had unplugged her from reality. One hand on her stomach, the other gripping the edge of the gift table. My father stood up fully now. "That's enough," he barked. But it wasn't. Because this wasn't about embarrassment anymore. It was about pattern. I stepped slightly aside and extended my hand toward Olivia. She walked forward. No drama, no theatrics. Just a thin leather folder in her hands. "I didn't plan to speak today," Olivia said clearly, voice steady. "But since my name is already in the room..." Daniel lunged forward. "Don't," he warned under his breath. She didn't even look at him. "2 years ago," she continued, "Daniel and I co-founded a pediatric mobility studio. I invested $47,218.63 of my own savings. 3 months later, the business account was empty. You could feel the investors shifting in their seats. One of them, a tall man in a gray suit, lowered his glass slowly. Olivia opened the folder. "These are the transfer logs. Vendor invoices that don't exist. Crypto exchange deposits under Daniel's personal account." She looked directly at the investor table. "I never filed charges. I wanted to believe it was incompetence. It wasn't." Daniel finally grabbed the microphone from my hand. "This is defamation," he snapped. I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "Defamation requires falsehood." The gray-suited investor raised his hand slightly. "Daniel," he said carefully, "is there an explanation?" Here's the moment people misunderstand about exposure. It isn't the accusation that destroys someone. It's the silence afterward. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Melanie, looked at my father, and then did what fraudsters always do when cornered. He pivoted. "It was a liquidity bridge," he said quickly. "Temporary redirection of funds during a cash flow squeeze." Olivia didn't blink. "Then why did you open the crypto wallet 2 hours after transferring the funds?" she asked. The investor table went still. I stepped forward again. "Daniel," I said softly, "if it was a bridge, you won't mind signing the release agreement acknowledging repayment." I pulled the document from my clutch. Elaine had prepared it perfectly. Simple. Concise. It stated that Daniel Crawford acknowledged misappropriating $47,218.63 from Martinez Pediatric Mobility LLC and agreed to repayment in full, already held in escrow pending signature. I placed it on the gift table beside the pink-wrapped baby registry box. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Melanie's breathing became shallow. "You're ruining my baby shower," she whispered. I turned to her. "No," I said evenly. "I'm preventing future investors from being ruined." The gray-suited investor stood up. "I'd like to see that document," he said. Daniel's face drained. Because here's what he understood in that second. If he refused to sign, he confirmed guilt. If he signed, he admitted it publicly. And if he tried to leave, well, there were 87 witnesses. My father stepped forward, voice shaking. "Clara, stop this." I looked at him. "Stop what? Transparency? You're humiliating your sister." "No," I replied quietly. "He is." Daniel tried one more time. "This is personal. You're doing this because of the house." Ah, there it was. Projection. I leaned closer. "The house is secured," I said softly. "This is about character." Olivia slid the escrow confirmation letter across the table. "The money is already here," she said calmly. "You don't even lose financially. You just lose the lie." That line hung in the air. You just lose the lie. Daniel's hands trembled slightly. One of the investors checked his phone. Another whispered something to his wife. Melanie looked like she might faint. "Daniel," she said, barely audible, "tell them it's not true." He didn't. Because he couldn't. Instead, he did something unexpected. He looked at me, not with arrogance, not with anger, but calculation. "How far are you planning to take this?" he asked quietly. I held his gaze. "All the way," I said. There was no threat in my tone, no volume, just inevitability. He picked up the pen, signed. And the ballroom exhaled. The gray-suited investor nodded once. "Thank you for clarifying," he said coolly. Clarifying. Such a polite word for dismantling someone's credibility. Olivia took back the signed agreement. No applause, no shouting. Just quiet reputational collapse. Daniel stepped away from the table. He looked smaller now. Not physically, but structurally. Melanie burst into tears. "This was supposed to be about our baby," she cried. I walked toward her slowly. "It still is," I said gently. "And now that baby won't grow up inside a financial lie." She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Because this wasn't the quiet sister who tolerated dismissal. This was the woman who audits systems for a living. And systems fail when fraud goes unchallenged. The party dissolved slowly after that. Investors left early. The social committee chair avoided eye contact. My mother refused to look at me. Daniel disappeared into the hallway. But here's what none of them realized. That signature, it wasn't the end. It was documentation. Because earlier that morning, before I even put on my dress, I received an email from the county prosecutor's office. They wanted to speak with Daniel Crawford regarding a second financial irregularity, a larger one. And this time, it isn't $47,000. It's closer to $180,000. Would you have stopped after the signature, or would you let the next layer unfold? 3 days after the baby shower, at 8:03 a.m., 2 certified letters arrived at the house. One was addressed to Richard Bennett, the other to Daniel Crawford. Both bore the seal of the DuPage County State's Attorney's Office. If you've ever watched someone open an envelope that quietly rearranges their future, you know how loud silence can be. I was at the kitchen island when the mail dropped through the slot. Daniel had slept in the guest room since the shower. Melanie hadn't posted online once. My father picked up the envelopes first. His hand shook when he saw the return address. "What is it?" my mother asked. He didn't answer. Daniel walked in, hair uncombed, still in yesterday's shirt. He saw the second envelope with his name on it and froze. No one spoke. That's the thing about official mail. It doesn't argue. It doesn't accuse loudly. It just exists. Daniel tore his open first. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched his breathing change. "What is it?" Melanie whispered. He swallowed. "They want an interview," he said. "Voluntary." Voluntary interviews are the polite beginning of something not voluntary later. My father opened his letter. His shoulders sagged. "They're expanding the mortgage fraud review," he muttered. Expanded. That word matters. Because when investigators say expanded, it means they found something else. And they had. 2 days earlier, I met with Assistant State's Attorney Colleen Hayes. Professional. Direct. No theatrics. She slid a folder across the table. "Ms. Bennett," she said, "we've traced attempted collateralization documents beyond First Prairie lending." My stomach went still. "Beyond?" I asked. "Yes. There were 3 separate inquiries using the forged corrective deed. 3, not 1, not 2. 3. 1 regional bank, 1 online lending platform, and 1 private equity bridge lender in Chicago. That last one? They had already initiated preliminary underwriting. If that third lender had wired funds," she said carefully, "we'd be looking at 6-figure exposure." "How much?" I asked. Pre-approval was set at $180,000. There it was, the real number. Not nursery paint money. Not renovation budgets. Full leverage. They weren't trying to move me out. They were trying to extract equity and run. I sat very still. "Do they know we have the video and expired notary evidence?" I asked. She nodded. "They know." That morning, Daniel read his letter again. "Voluntary," he repeated. My father paced. "You'll cooperate," he said sharply. Daniel looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You think they're going after me alone?" The room went quiet. My mother sank into a chair. Melanie clutched her stomach. Because here's what fraud does. It doesn't divide cleanly. It spreads. "You authorized the email," Daniel said to my father. "You drafted the deed," my father shot back. "You told me the house was yours. It was supposed to be." And there it was. The truth, not legal ownership. Entitlement. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. They were dismantling each other. That afternoon, Daniel called a lawyer, not Elaine. A criminal defense attorney. That's when Melanie finally came to my door. Her eyes were red. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Clara," she whispered, "did you report the private lender?" I held her gaze. I reported suspicious title activity. The lenders report the rest themselves. Her lips trembled. They could press charges. "Yes. You'd let that happen?" I didn't answer immediately, because this was the pivot point. Revenge is loud. Justice is quiet. "I didn't forge anything," I said calmly. "I didn't apply for loans. I didn't lie under oath." She shook her head. "You're enjoying this." No, I wasn't enjoying it. I was done absorbing it. "Melanie," I said gently, "when Daniel signed that corrective deed, Did you know? Silence. Her eyes flicked away. That told me enough. You knew, I said. We thought it would go through, she whispered. There's something chilling about that phrase. We thought it would go through. Like morality was just paperwork. That night, my father tried one more strategy. Family unity. He called a meeting. Dining room table. All of us seated. You withdraw the complaint, he told me flatly. I looked at him. I didn't file a complaint, I said. The lenders did. You triggered it. No, I replied evenly. Your emails did. Daniel leaned forward. If this goes criminal, nobody wins. I folded my hands. Explain that. Charges mean public record, he said. Media coverage. Melanie's name attached. Your name attached. Fear of reputation. The final defense. You were comfortable using my name on forged documents, I said softly. Why protect it now? Silence. My mother finally broke. We were trying to protect the family, she cried. I almost smiled. Fraud is never protection. It's preservation of ego. I'll cooperate fully with investigators, I said. You should too. My father slammed his hand down. You're our daughter. And you used that, I replied. That was the last family meeting. 2 days later, Daniel attended his voluntary interview. He came back, pale, quiet. Different. What did they ask? Melanie whispered. Everything, he said. They have transaction logs, he added. Crypto transfers, email chains, IP addresses. My father went still. IP addresses. Which meant they had traced the corrective deed submission back to the house network. Shared network, shared liability. Layer 3 was no longer theoretical. It was procedural. That evening, I received a call from Assistant State's Attorney Hayes. They're considering formal charges, she said. For which party? I asked. Still evaluating. That was strategic language, which meant someone was talking, and someone was protecting themselves. If you were in my position right now, would you intervene to reduce the fallout? Or would you let the system do what systems are designed to do? Because tomorrow morning, one of them is meeting prosecutors again, alone. And I know exactly who requested the private session. At 6:42 a.m. on Thursday morning, Daniel left the house without waking Melanie. He didn't take his briefcase. He didn't kiss her goodbye. He took his laptop and the manila folder I'd seen him hiding under the guest bed. If you've ever watched someone choose self-preservation over loyalty, you know it rarely happens loudly. It happens quietly, efficiently, and it changes everything. I was already awake. I heard the front door click shut. I waited exactly 3 minutes before checking the security camera feed on my phone. He didn't drive toward his attorney's office. He drove downtown, toward the courthouse, toward the state's attorney's building, alone. I didn't tell anyone. Not my father, not my mother, not Melanie. Because sometimes the most powerful position is simply knowing first. At 8:15 a.m., Melanie came downstairs in pajamas. Have you seen Daniel? She asked, rubbing her eyes. He left early, I replied calmly. For what? I met her gaze. I imagine damage control. She frowned, confused. He said the interview was next week. Maybe he rescheduled. Her stomach tightened visibly under her hand. You think he's cooperating? She whispered. I didn't answer, because the answer was already unfolding. At 11:03 a.m., my phone rang. Assistant State's Attorney Hayes. They're separating liability, she said without greeting, meaning someone was providing information. Daniel? I asked. Yes, there it was. He brought additional documentation, she continued. Emails, drafts, timeline notes. And, I asked evenly, he's asserting primary authorship was not his. I almost laughed. Of course he was. Fraudsters don't drown together. They push someone else under first. He's claiming Richard Bennett drafted the corrective deed language and instructed him to locate a notary, she added. Layer 3 was officially fracturing. Is that verifiable? I asked. We're reviewing metadata from the Word document drafts. Metadata. Timestamps, author IDs, revision history. Fraud leaves fingerprints, but so does desperation. Does Melanie know? I asked. No. Of course not. Daniel wasn't protecting his wife. He was protecting himself. By 1:40 p.m., my father received a phone call. I watched from the hallway as his face changed. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just went very still. When he hung up, he looked 10 years older. "They want me in tomorrow," he said flatly. "For what?" my mother whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Melanie's hands began to shake. "He wouldn't," she whispered. I finally stepped into the room. "He already did," I said quietly. She looked at me like I'd struck her. "Daniel is cooperating." Her breath left her in a rush. "No." "Yes." She backed away slowly. "You made this happen," she said, voice hollow. I shook my head. "Number. Documentation did." Here's what people misunderstand about silence. Silence isn't weakness. It's observation. And Daniel had been observing. He knew about the expired notary. He knew about the surveillance footage. He knew about the 3 lender attempts. He knew about the IP address trace. He also knew something else. There were email threads, internal ones, between him and my father, discussing the strategy, which meant one of them was going to absorb the majority of criminal intent. And Daniel just chose his side. That night, my father knocked on my door. He didn't knock hard. He didn't command. He knocked like a man asking permission. "Clara," he said quietly when I opened it. "Did you know?" "Yes." "You knew he would flip." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "He's saying I drafted everything. Did you?" I asked. He didn't answer. Silence is revealing. "I told him the house was mine," he said finally. "That's not drafting," I replied. He swallowed. I approved the language. There it was. Intent. He looked at me then. Not angry, not dominant, just tired. "You could intervene," he said softly. "How?" "You could tell them it was a misunderstanding." I held his gaze. "Was it?" His shoulders sagged. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. Not because of me. Because of consequence. "Your mother can't handle this," he added. "That's not a legal defense," I said quietly. He closed his eyes briefly. "Families shouldn't do this to each other." And there it was again. That word, family. I stepped back slightly. "You tried to remove me from my own property," I said calmly. "You authorized forged documents. You involved third-party lenders." He flinched. I didn't think it would escalate. Escalation doesn't start at prosecution. It starts at entitlement. The next morning, he went to his interview. Daniel was already there. Separate rooms, separate counsel, separate narratives. By afternoon, Assistant State's Attorney Hayes called again. "They're both assigning responsibility to each other," she said. "And Melanie?" I asked. "She's not currently implicated." Currently, that word mattered. Because shared IP addresses, shared knowledge, shared beneficiary. She wasn't clean, just unproven. "What happens next?" I asked. "Charging decision within 2 weeks." 2 weeks. Exactly the amount of time before the real estate closing date I had quietly scheduled. Because while they were unraveling legally, I had been preparing something else. That afternoon, I met with a private buyer. Corporate acquisition group. Cash offer. No contingencies. And when they ran title search, they saw the trust. They saw the fraud alert. They saw the clean chain of ownership. Which meant this house, this battlefield, was about to leave all of us. But I haven't told them yet. Not my father, not my mother, not Melanie. Because when prosecutors move and buyers close, silence becomes irreversible. If your own father tried to pin a felony on you, would you save him? Or would you let the truth divide what lies built? 14 days after Daniel walked into the state's attorney's office alone, I wired $12,480 to a Manhattan escrow account and signed a 27-page employment contract. No one in my family knew I had accepted a director-level compliance position with a global public health firm in New York. And no one knew the house was already under contract. If you've ever planned your exit while everyone else was planning their defense, you understand the kind of silence I was living in. Strategic, controlled, final. The offer on the house came in at $1,185,000. All cash. 10-day close. No inspection contingency. Corporate acquisition group converting historic properties into boutique executive rentals. I signed the purchase agreement the same afternoon my father and Daniel finished their second round of interviews. Timing isn't accidental. It's leverage. That night, Melanie cornered me in the hallway. Her eyes were swollen. She hadn't been sleeping. "They're considering charges," she said in a whisper. "Yes," I replied. "For Dad." "I know. And maybe Daniel." I didn't respond. She stepped closer. You could tell them you misunderstood the intent. There it was again. Rewrite history. Repackage fraud as confusion. I didn't misunderstand, I said calmly. They applied for 3 separate loans using forged documentation. She flinched. It wasn't supposed to go that far. It always goes that far, I replied softly. When people assume there won't be consequences. Her voice cracked. You're going to let them destroy him. No. I wasn't letting anything happen. The system was moving exactly as it was designed to. I didn't draft the deed, I said evenly. I didn't send the emails. I didn't authorize the applications. But you could stop cooperating. There it was. The real request. Withdraw. Complicate the case. Introduce ambiguity. I held her gaze. Melanie, I said quietly. If I stop cooperating, they subpoena records. She went still. And when they subpoena, I continued, they pull everything. Shared IP logs, shared financial records, shared beneficiary knowledge. You're not implicated right now, I said carefully. But that could change. Her face drained. You wouldn't. I don't control subpoenas, I replied. That was the moment she understood. I wasn't attacking. I was stepping aside. And the machinery was heavy. 2 days later, the charging decision arrived. Richard Bennett, indicted for attempted mortgage fraud and submission of fraudulent documentation. Daniel Crawford, indicted for conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud and financial misrepresentation. Thomas Keller, charged separately for false notarization and perjury. Melanie was not charged, but her name appeared in the filing as financially adjacent. Public record. Permanent. When my father read the indictment summary, he didn't yell. He just sat down. My mother began sobbing. Daniel locked himself in the guest room, and I walked upstairs to finalize the closing documents. Because here's the part they didn't see coming. The indictment triggers a lender flag. A criminal fraud charge tied to a property address complicates future lending viability, which meant if I didn't sell now, the house would sit under a cloud for years. I wasn't staying to litigate through appeals. I was liquidating. The next morning, I called a family meeting. Dining room table, one last time. I need to inform you of something, I said calmly. No one looked ready. The house is under contract. Closing is in 8 days. Silence. Then chaos. You can't sell it, my mother cried. It's legally mine, I replied. We live here. You tried to leverage it. My father looked at me slowly. You planned this. Yes. Daniel came downstairs, face hollow. You're evicting us during indictment? I'm selling during clarity, I said evenly. The distinction mattered. Where are we supposed to go? Melanie whispered. That's not my decision, I replied. My father stared at the table. Is there anything, he asked quietly, that changes your mind? There it was. Not anger, not dominance. A man realizing control was gone. No, I said. Not because I hated him. Not because I wanted revenge. Because trust isn't rebuilt during prosecution. 8 days later, the house closed. Funds wired. Title transferred. I stood in the empty foyer while movers loaded the last of their belongings into a rental truck. No shouting this time. No eviction spectacle. Just exhaustion. My father paused at the doorway. This didn't have to end like this, he said. Yes, I replied softly. It did. Daniel didn't look at me. Melanie held her stomach and avoided my eyes. They drove away at 4:32 p.m. The new owners changed the locks by 6. That night, I slept in a hotel near O'Hare. 1 suitcase, 1 carry-on, 1 life that didn't require defense. But here's what no one knows yet. There's a final hearing scheduled in 3 weeks, and Daniel has requested a plea arrangement. Not for himself, for my father. And what he's offering in exchange changes the narrative again. If someone who betrayed you offers a deal, do you listen, or do you let consequence complete the story? 21 days after the house sold, at exactly 9:17 a.m., Daniel Crawford signed a preliminary plea cooperation agreement. He did it without telling Melanie. He did it without telling my father. And he did it in exchange for something that made my stomach go completely still. If you've ever watched someone try to trade loyalty for survival, you already know. There's always a cost. I was in my Manhattan sublet when Elaine called. The skyline outside my window looked sharp, clean, detached. Clara, she said, voice measured. Daniel has made an offer. Of course he has, I replied. He's proposing full cooperation. Testimony, document disclosure, digital access to all devices used in the mortgage attempts. And in exchange, I asked, reduced charge, possibly probation instead of felony conviction. I leaned back slowly. And Richard? Elaine hesitated. He's not included in the reduction. There it was. Daniel was trading my father, not just shifting blame in interviews. Formally. Strategically. Legally. What exactly is he offering? I asked. All internal communications, she replied, including financial notes predating the HELOC. My chest tightened slightly. Predating? I repeated. Yes, meaning this didn't start 2 months ago. It started earlier. Much earlier. Elaine continued carefully. There's evidence of exploratory conversations about transferring the property as early as last fall. Last fall, 8 months ago. Before Easter. Before the eviction. Before the baby shower. This wasn't reactive. It was premeditated. I closed my eyes for a second. You're sure? I asked. Yes. Daniel had saved emails, draft notes, even voice memos. Why? Insurance. He had been building a fallback plan from the beginning. If it collapsed, he'd walk lighter than everyone else. I exhaled slowly. And what's the leverage? I asked. He's offering to testify that Richard drafted the corrective deed language and directed Thomas Keller. And Melanie? I asked. She's mentioned in discussions, but not positioned as architect. He was protecting his wife, but sacrificing her father. Calculated. Cold. Very Daniel. What's the prosecution's stance? I asked. They're considering it. Of course they were. Because cooperation strengthens conviction odds. That afternoon, I flew back to Chicago for the preliminary hearing conference. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to see it. The courthouse hallway smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. My father looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Daniel stood 20 feet away. No eye contact between them. Melanie sat between them like a fault line. The prosecutors stepped into a side conference room. Defense counsel followed. Doors closed. 47 minutes passed. When they came out, I saw it immediately. My father's lawyer looked grim. Daniel's lawyer looked relieved. Melanie looked like she couldn't breathe. The plea deal wasn't final, but it was moving. That's when my father saw me. For a moment, I thought he might be angry. He wasn't. He looked betrayed. You knew, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. You're letting him do this. I'm not controlling him, I said. He's protecting himself. My father muttered. Yes. Silence stretched between us. He's your brother-in-law, he added. He forged my signature, I replied. The truth doesn't soften when spoken calmly. It sharpens. Daniel finally approached. He looked tired. Calculated. Clara, he said, voice low. This doesn't have to drag out. Explain, I said. I cooperate fully. I provide documentation. Charges consolidate primarily on your father. Melanie avoids exposure. And you? I asked. Probation. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He hesitated. Because you influence how aggressively they pursue collateral impact. There it was. He thought I could shape sentencing tone. Mitigation weight. Victim impact framing. You want me to be neutral, I said. Yes, neutral. After forgery, after eviction, after leverage attempts. I won't interfere, I said. His shoulders relaxed slightly. But I won't protect you either. His jaw tightened. That's fair, he muttered. Was it? Fair isn't a legal concept. It's an emotional one. That night, I met Elaine for dinner. Do you feel anything? She asked quietly. I thought about it. My father, facing felony conviction. Daniel, positioning himself as cooperative. Melanie, unraveling in silence. I feel clarity, I said, because here's the truth. For years, I absorbed dismissal. I protected my father's image. I ignored Daniel's patterns. I excused Melanie's entitlement. Not anymore. When people choose fraud over integrity, they choose the outcome too. 3 days later, the plea cooperation agreement became official. Daniel would testify. Richard Bennett would stand primary defendant. Melanie would avoid indictment. And I would submit a written victim statement. But I haven't written it yet. Because victim statements aren't about anger. They're about impact. And I need to decide something. Do I emphasize betrayal or do I emphasize pattern? Because how I frame it determines how the judge sees it. If you were me, would you soften the blow for a father who tried to erase you? Or would you let the record show exactly who he chose to be. On the morning of the sentencing hearing, at 8:58 a.m., I stood outside courtroom 304, holding a 3-page victim impact statement that could tilt the outcome by years.
3 pages.
Single-spaced. Every word intentional. If you've ever realized that your voice, not your anger, not your tears, not your revenge, might be the most powerful thing in the room, you understand how steady I felt. Not furious, not shaking. Steady. Richard Bennett stood 10 feet away with his defense attorney. He wasn't in handcuffs. White-collar defendants rarely are. Daniel sat behind his own counsel, separated now not just legally, but socially. He wore a navy suit, conservative tie, cooperative posture. Melanie sat between my parents, 7 months pregnant, silent. The judge entered at 9:02 a.m. The prosecutor summarized the plea structure first. Daniel Crawford pled guilty to conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud. Recommended sentence: 18 months probation, financial penalties, mandatory restitution compliance, and felony record. Richard Bennett pled guilty to attempted mortgage fraud and submission of fraudulent documentation. Recommended sentence: 24 months probation, $35,000 in fines and court fees, felony conviction, supervised compliance. Thomas Keller, separate sentencing pending, no prison time requested. But felony records are permanent. The prosecutor then referenced aggravating factors: multiple lender attempts, premeditation, forgery, digital manipulation, use of familial relationship to access property. Then she said it. The victim, Ms. Clara Bennett, is present and has submitted a statement. The judge looked toward me. Ms. Bennett, would you like to speak?
Yes.
I walked to the podium, heavier than I expected, but I didn't grip it. I let my hands rest loosely at my sides. My name is Clara Bennett, I began, voice even. I am 33 years old. I am a certified public health compliance officer and CPA. No theatrics, just facts. For 5 years, I allowed my father to publicly present himself as the owner of property legally transferred to me. I did so out of respect. I paused. In return, he attempted to remove me from that property and authorize financial instruments using forged documentation. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. This case is not about family conflict, I continued. It is about intent. 3 separate lender attempts were made. One included a forged corrective deed. Another included an expired notary. A third reached preliminary underwriting. The courtroom was silent. My concern is not emotional harm, I said. It is structural risk. When individuals believe they can override legal boundaries because of familial proximity, the damage extends beyond personal relationships. The judge watched carefully. I did not seek incarceration, I added, but I do request the court acknowledge the deliberate nature of these actions. I let that sit. Then I finished. Trust, once weaponized, is not easily rebuilt. 3 pages. No raised voice. No accusation. Just clarity. I stepped back. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Richard's attorney attempted mitigation. Stress. Family misunderstanding. No funds disbursed. Daniel's attorney emphasized cooperation. Documentation provided. Early admission. Restitution signed. The judge leaned back. Mr. Bennett, she said to my father, this court is particularly concerned with the use of forged documents involving family property. Your daughter's restraint does not minimize the seriousness. He didn't respond. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Crawford, cooperation mitigates sentencing, but cooperation does not erase culpability. Then she delivered it. Richard Bennett, 30 months supervised probation, $42,000 combined fines and legal costs. Mandatory financial ethics counseling. Felony conviction entered. Daniel Crawford, 24 months probation, $25,000 in fines and restitution compliance. Felony conviction entered. Gavel struck. It wasn't dramatic, but it was final. Melanie broke first. Tears. My mother followed. My father remained seated. Daniel avoided eye contact entirely. I didn't stay for post-hearing discussion. I stepped outside into cold Chicago air. And for the first time in months, I felt light. Not victorious, not vindicated, light, because consequence had completed itself. No shouting, No courtroom explosion. No prison vans. Just record. Permanent. That afternoon, Daniel approached me in the parking lot. "You could have pushed for incarceration," he said quietly. "I didn't need to," I replied. He nodded once. "Melanie doesn't know how to process this. That's not my responsibility." He looked like he might argue. He didn't. Instead, he said something unexpected. "You were always underestimated." "Yes," I replied calmly. "That was their mistake." He exhaled slowly. "Good luck in New York." I didn't thank him. He didn't deserve it. That night, I boarded a flight back to Manhattan. First class upgrade. Window seat. The skyline greeted me with sharp edges and clean anonymity. But here's the part that still lingers. Felony probation requires financial disclosure, which means audits, which means investigators will continue reviewing accounts. And there's one ledger entry, one large withdrawal. That hasn't been fully explained yet. Not by Daniel, not by my father. And it predates even the corrective deed, $96,000, moved last September from an account tied to my grandmother's estate. If that transaction surfaces fully, the story isn't over. Would you walk away now, or would you pull that last thread? On October 14th of last year, at 3:26 p.m., exactly $96,000 was withdrawn from an account tied to my grandmother's estate. It wasn't part of the mortgage attempt. It wasn't part of the corrective deed. It was quieter than that, and it had never been explained. If you've ever felt like something wasn't finished, even after the gavel falls, you know that feeling. The loose thread, the missing line item. Most people would have walked away after sentencing. Felony convictions entered. House sold. New job secured. New city. Clean exit. But I am an auditor. And auditors don't ignore unexplained transfers, especially not six figures. 3 days after the hearing, I requested certified copies of the estate account history from the bank that originally managed my grandmother's assets. I still had legal standing to review it. The estate had closed years ago, but one auxiliary account remained dormant, reserved for property-related contingencies. That was the account the $96,000 came from. The withdrawal authorization was signed by Richard Bennett. But here's the detail that mattered. It was co-signed electronically by Daniel Crawford last September, 7 months before Easter, 6 months before the first HELOC attempt, 5 months before the eviction notice. This wasn't reactive fraud. It was strategic groundwork. The transfer went to a newly formed LLC, RBDC Holdings, LLC, registered in Illinois. Manager listed, Daniel Crawford. Secondary member, Richard Bennett. Purpose of business, real estate development and asset restructuring. Asset restructuring. I stared at the screen in my Manhattan office and let the pattern settle. They weren't just trying to borrow against the house. They were preparing to move it. My phone rang. "Elaine, you saw it," she said. "Yes." They incorporated RBDC 3 days before the withdrawal. "And the funds?" I asked. "Used as seed capital." "For what?" She exhaled slowly. "To open a separate escrow inquiry for quiet title transfer." There it was. The real plan. Not HELOC. Not renovation. They were preparing to challenge title entirely. Claim estate oversight. Argue clerical error. Attempt to shift ownership into the LLC. Then sell. I felt something then. Not anger. Not rage. Cold recognition. They were going to erase me. Legally. Gradually. With documentation. That's why they tried to evict me, I said quietly. "Yes," Elaine replied. "Possession strengthens adverse claims. If they'd removed me physically, then filed corrective documents, then challenged title, they might have created a cloud strong enough to force settlement. It would have taken years to untangle. They were building leverage. On paper, using estate funds, my grandmother's funds. I closed my eyes for a moment, because here's the part that still hurt. My grandmother trusted my father. She left the house to me specifically because she believed I would protect it. And he tried to turn her final act of protection into capital. "So what now?" Elaine asked. Good question. Legally, the criminal case was complete. But this was civil. Estate misuse, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of funds, and the statute of limitations was very much alive. "I can file," Elaine said carefully. "We can pursue recovery of the $96,000 plus damages." "And if we do?" I asked. It escalates financial disclosure requirements. Their probation compliance would be reviewed. It could reopen sentencing parameters, which meant possible probation violation, which meant possible incarceration. I stood up and walked to the window. Manhattan below me, sharp, unforgiving, clean. My father was already a convicted felon. Daniel, too. Melanie was living in a small rental outside Chicago. Probation officers now reviewed their bank statements monthly. Their reputations were fractured. And here I was, with a new job, a new address, a clean ledger. Would reopening this heal anything, or would it simply prove I could? That night, I didn't call Elaine back. Instead, I opened my laptop and drafted a letter. Not to the court, not to prosecutors. To my father. Subject line: Estate account transfer, September 14th. I attached the bank record, the LLC filing, the escrow inquiry. 3 documents, no accusation. Just one question. Were you ever going to tell me? He responded 12 hours later. 2 sentences. We thought it would simplify everything. You weren't supposed to find out. There it was. Not apology. Not denial. Confirmation. You weren't supposed to find out. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop. Because here's the truth most revenge stories don't tell you. Closure isn't always public. Sometimes it's internal. They didn't regret the attempt. They regretted getting caught. And that's a different kind of character flaw. The next morning, I called Elaine. Don't file, I said. She paused. You're sure? Yes. Why? Because I already won. Not the house, not the courtroom, not the humiliation. I won the pattern. I saw it. I documented it. I survived it, and I removed myself from it. Filing civil recovery would tie me back to them for another 2 years. Depositions, motions, hearings, energy. No. The $96,000 was the cost of final clarity. And clarity is expensive. That afternoon, I received confirmation of my permanent Manhattan lease. Corner unit, floor-to-ceiling windows, Hudson River view. As I signed the digital agreement, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace without tension underneath it. Not temporary relief. Stable peace. But there's one last conversation that hasn't happened yet. Melanie requested to see me alone. No lawyers, no parents, no Daniel. She says she needs to ask one question, and I already know what it is. If your sister stood in front of you, pregnant, scared, broken from consequences she helped create, would you offer forgiveness or boundaries? 42 days after the sentencing, on a gray Tuesday afternoon at 3:11 p.m., I met my sister in a quiet cafe, halfway between her rental apartment and the commuter rail station. She was 8 months pregnant, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't dressed like someone expecting to be admired. If you've ever had to look at someone you love and realize love is not the same thing as trust, you know how that kind of meeting feels. Heavy, quiet, honest. Melanie walked in slowly. No makeup, no performance. She sat across from me and folded her hands on the table like she was bracing for impact. I won't take much of your time, she said. I'm not in a rush, I replied. That wasn't entirely true. My flight back to New York was at 7:20 p.m., but I wasn't rushing this. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked it. Do you hate us? Not angry, not defensive, just raw. I held her gaze. No, I said. She exhaled shakily. But you walked away. Yes. Her eyes filled. You didn't fight for us. I let that sit between us. Melanie, I said gently, I fought for 5 years. She blinked. I paid the taxes. I protected Dad's reputation. I ignored Daniel's patterns. I absorbed the dismissal. I kept the peace. Her shoulders dropped slightly. You didn't see it as fighting, I continued. But I was fighting quietly the entire time. She looked down at her hands. We thought you'd always just stay. There it was. The real assumption. Not that I would forgive. Not that I would agree. That I would remain available. I leaned forward slightly. That was the mistake, I said softly. Silence settled over the table. She swallowed. Daniel says you destroyed him. I didn't react. Daniel destroyed himself, I replied evenly. She nodded slowly. He's trying to start something small. Consulting, remote work. That's good, I said. He still thinks you went too far. I almost smiled. I went exactly as far as documentation required. She looked at me then, really looked at me. "You're different," she said quietly. "Yes." "How?" "I don't negotiate with disrespect anymore." That line hung in the air. Clear, clean, not cruel. She wiped at her eyes. "I don't know how to raise a child in this mess," she admitted. That was the first time she'd said something that wasn't about blame. It was about fear. "You raise them with truth," I said. "Truth got us here." "No," I corrected gently. "Avoiding truth got you here." She nodded slowly. "I didn't stop him," she whispered. "I know. I saw the emails. I know." Her voice cracked. "I thought it would work. I know." There's something powerful about saying "I know," not to accuse, but to acknowledge. She took a deep breath. "Will you be in the baby's life?" There it was. The real question. Not forgiveness. Access. I sat back in my chair. I didn't rush my answer. "Yes," I said finally. "On my terms." Her eyes flicked up. "What does that mean?" "It means I won't fund instability. I won't be manipulated. I won't tolerate lies." She nodded quickly. "I'm not asking for money." I know. It wasn't about money. It was about boundaries. "I'll be an aunt," I said calmly. "But I won't be a safety net." Tears slid down her cheeks. "That's fair." Fair. We were finally speaking in adult language. She reached across the table hesitantly. I didn't pull away, but I didn't grip tightly either. Balance. That's what this was. Not reconciliation. Not exile. Distance with clarity. When we stood to leave, she surprised me. "I'm sorry," she said. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just simple. "I believe you," I replied, and I did. But belief doesn't erase consequence. Outside the cafe, the wind cut through Chicago's early winter air. She walked toward her car. I walked toward the train. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking toward something. 3 weeks later, her baby was born. A girl. Healthy. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She texted me a photo. No caption. Just the image. Tiny fingers. Closed eyes. Unaware of adult greed. I sent back 3 words. "She deserves better." Melanie responded. I know. That was enough. I didn't attend probation check-ins. I didn't monitor fines. I didn't track their financial disclosures because I was building something else. 6 months later, I stood in my Manhattan apartment at 7:42 p.m., watching the Hudson reflect city lights. My promotion paperwork sat signed on the kitchen counter. Director of Compliance Operations. Salary, $214,000 annually. No co-signers, no shared deeds, no hidden emails. Just me. You know what the quietest revenge is? Stability. You know what the loudest karma is? When people realize you were never the liability. They were. I don't hate my family. I don't wish prison on them. But I don't lower my standards anymore to keep anyone comfortable. Blood may connect you, but integrity defines you. If you've ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping yourself, tell me in the comments which one you chose. And if this story felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe, because walking away isn't weakness, it's clarity. And clarity is power.